Well, Mr. Dwyer, welcome back to Life Lessons. How you doing?
Hey, I'm very good. It's a privilege to be with you and your listeners again, brother.
Well, thank you, sir. We were just reading the summary of Mustang, and what a beautiful book. We had a chance to read it over the weekend, and listen, it is just as well written and intriguing as its predecessor, Shortgrass. So well done, Mr. Dwyer.
Well, thank you, Rick. As you can imagine, for an author, those are music to your ears. You spend sometimes, like in this case, years with just you and your keyboard, your screen, and your story, and you're wondering, is anybody going to like this or even read it? So it's great to hear that kind of an early response from a reader and a leader like yourself. I really appreciate that.
Well, you deserve it. And, you know, we did give a little review on it, but I like to take a bit of a deeper dive into Lance Roark. And, you know, when we do shows like this, we do not want to give away everything because we want people to buy the book and to enjoy it. But tell us about the character arc of Lance and where he kind of grows up and transforms in front of our eyes in the book Mustang.
Well, as you know, having read it, Rick, Lance is kind of your all-American boy, you know, from the heartland, grows up during the Dust Bowl, farm boy in the Midwest, and athlete, and gets into flying before World War II starts. And of course, you know, a lot of that stuff is ground that's covered in Shortgrass, which is the prequel. And I think you kind of alluded to this, but you know, people don't have to have read Shortgrass to read Mustang. It's a standalone book. If you like Mustang, you might want to go back and read Shortgrass after. But in Mustang, of course, it, as you know, it shoots right out of the gate. Lance Roark lands. First scene is his first night at the air base in England, as World War II is really ramping up in the European Air War, and he and his buddies have landed there, and they're captaining a group of B-17 bombers. And of course, Lance takes that you know, heartland upbringing and devout Mennonite background and all with him at the beginning of the book. But as you know, there's going to be a lot of challenges, and as was the case for most people in that war, certainly the European Air War, which was the greatest aerial conflict in history, it went way beyond the challenges that anybody on any side thought that it would pose.
Indeed. And, you know, that's for the young generation that doesn't understand nor appreciate World War II and what went on. You write with such detail, and the emotion that comes out of Waddy, his friend, and Lance, and part of this personal guilt is a preview to what a lot of soldiers face today to this day, and it's PTSD. And, you know, we mentioned it before you came on board about he was thinking about the bodies that were mounting and the casualties from where he had bombed. What does your book say about how one goes through their own personal journey, especially one of faith, when it comes to post-war activity in life?
Well, Rick, I think you're really getting at the heart of kind of what I would consider the bonus package of Mustang. I've been asked about this before by various people kind of in the formulation of the story, and I think there really is kind of a bonus pack that comes with it that you do not get typically in any war saga, and certainly of that generation, World War II. And what do I mean by bonus? Well, first of all, as you know, there's a Christian worldview that overlays all of this. Now, as you know, that doesn't mean that we don't go into the rough and tumble of it, the bitterness, the the sorrows and the tragedy that descend on really that whole greatest generation of Americans that were caught up in this conflict that these young people themselves had nothing to do with, and yet they were the ones that were called upon to go and not just defend our country, but really save the world, because our allies were just getting rolled over for years before we got into that conflict. And so yet there is a Christian worldview and sensibility that hopefully permeates it all. There's also, as you alluded, there is I believe, a much more penetrating exploration of the subject of post-traumatic stress disorder for the World War II generation. That really came to light more with the Vietnam War and our Middle Eastern conflicts more recently. But growing up as a baby boomer, as a child of the greatest generation, I can remember now a lot of situations where there were guys, typically veterans, that came back that we never heard what their experiences were. They never shared them. Most of them, if they did share them, it was late in life. But these guys did not have the outlets that a lot of the soldiers do today for the tragedy and the grief that they went through. And so what this book tries to do is to take some all-American guys like Lance. You mentioned Waddy Young, who was a real character, was the first consensus All-American football player at the University of Oklahoma, and then he became a pro football star. He was called the Iron Dodger because he was the only player that went both ways for 2 solid years for the Brooklyn Dodgers football team back when they were a big powerhouse. And so these guys go in there, and they're kind of us. They're kind of our children, even though it's an earlier generation. And we see the World War II generation, they didn't call it PTSD, they called it shell shock. And I can remember myself, Rick, having an uncle, and periodically, he's a great guy, he's a very successful businessman, but periodically we'd be at their house and he'd get up and leave the room, and I'd ask my mom, I'd say, "Where's Uncle George going?" She'd say, "Well, he's just got that shell shock." And I said, "Well, what's shell shock?" And she said, "Well, it's just where they're kind of hard of hearing because, they heard a lot of loud noises and guns in World War II. Well, of course, now we know shell shock was what they used to call PTSD. And so we really go into that, unlike most World War II stories. I might add that we also talk and kind of give a little bit of a peek into the challenging race relations that were part of that war. We had white soldiers, black soldiers, brown soldiers. We had a cross-section of American young people in our Army that won that war. And, of course, a lot of that's been overlooked in past stories. And we kind of get into the challenges of that subject for all of the soldiers, because there really were some challenges and some conflicts within our own ranks during that war. And I think, finally, just the desperate difficulty and hardship and cost that it took for us, for the Americans, to win the European Air War. We were going up against the German Luftwaffe. It was the greatest air force in history. They had just beaten all comers. And for us to have a D-Day, for us to have a victory in Europe over Germany, which was really the greatest foe that we came against, we had to win the war in the air first. We had to clear their air force out of the sky so that our soldiers on the ground could advance. So, if folks are interested in American history, if they're interested in World War II, if they're interested in what was it really like to be in that war, I interviewed many World War II veterans. This wasn't something out of my own imagination. This was based on interviews with B-17 pilots, with P-51 Mustang fighter pilots, with the guys that actually were in the cockpit. And let me tell you, those guys, they gave it to me straight. They didn't sugarcoat anything. And, I heard a lot of things from them that I had never read before in a World War II novel. So I don't know if that answers the question, but maybe give you a little overview of what folks will experience if they buy a Mustang.
Yeah, those are John, those are the voices that we heard loud and clear in your book, and we want to make sure that our listening audience gets a chance to read Mustang and Short Grass and every other piece of work that you've done, because I think it's about as close to the front lines as you can get. Where can our listeners go today to buy Mustang?
Well, the book officially releases on May 23rd, but you can order it today, and you can do that online, Barnes & Noble online, Amazon online. Those are probably two simplest places. I'm sure there's other outlets, but I know those are places. They have the book discounted. You can get it in hardcover or softcover. So yeah, go to barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com and just type in Mustang and Dwyer, D-W-Y-E-R, and you can get it. You can get it today.
Excellent. And John, as is a tradition on our Life Lessons show, we want you to provide a few encouraging words to young authors out there, especially those that may want to pursue this same channel or vertical called historical novels. What advice would you give them today about the important work of being in this space?
Well, I think that it is important, Rick. And I think, first of all, draw from your own life. Now, your own life can be your life experiences. It can also be your interests. My own life, one of the pilots that read this book in a draft stage couldn't believe that I'd never flown a plane. He said, wow, he goes, you write like you have been in the cockpit. And I said, well, I haven't, but a lot of the people that I've known, that I've spoken to, that I've interviewed have. And that's my job as the scribe. My job is to be the storyteller. My job is to be the herald. My job is to tell the story of those people, in many cases that have done things I haven't, but that it would be important for others to know what they've done. And so in my case, Rick, I've taught history and ethics at Southern Nazarene University since 2006. And Southern Nazarene is one of the 13 colleges in America that has a certain, really invested status in reaching and helping and serving military veterans. We're the only one in our state of Oklahoma that has that status, for instance. And so I have known these young men and women for many, many years now that have been deployed, that have been in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I've spent, many an hour hearing their stories, them pouring their heart out, and things that didn't get on the news, that didn't get in the TV shows and stuff that I heard firsthand. And so that kind of channeled into the writing of this World War II book, because I was able to speak to young men and women of the modern age that have been through the types of intense experience and terror and danger that these fellas in an earlier generation had. So that really helped. But I would say the other thing as a writer is write your story, write your passion. Don't let the prevailing trends or other people's opinions or what you think is popular make your decision on what to write about. Especially if you're a Christian, you go before the Lord, you figure out what is my mission from Him? What is my assignment from Him to write about? If He's gifted me with some ability to write and the inclination to do so, we've all got different assignments. What's mine? And I would say that you write the story that you feel is on your heart, that you have a burning passion to tell, and that's going to be your best book ultimately, and trust God for the results in the book sales.
Oh, wow. Beautifully said, John. Hey, we appreciate you, and keep up the good work, and we know that this isn't the last great book that we will see from you, so stay after it. we think that you are getting better and better with every single book, and I personally enjoyed this, and I felt like you took me right into the middle of the war, and so you moved us, and we appreciate your talents.
Well, thank you, brother. And I would just say, if folks do want to know more about what I'm doing, our website's John J. Dwyer. That's John, middle initial J, Dwyer, DWYER.com. And I've got information on all my books and other activities on there. And then, as you said earlier, they can get Mustang, the World War II novel. They can order it today on BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com. I'm sure there's other outlets as well, but I know they can get it immediately on those sites.
Excellent. Thanks again, John. Keep up the great work, and we appreciate you. And have a blessed Easter.
Yes, you too, brother. God bless you, and God bless you for all the great work you do and giving a voice to people like me and other writers. Really appreciate it.
You bet. That was author John J. Dwyer. We appreciate him being on again. And his book is Mustang, and we fully endorse it. It is well written. Literally, you're going to climb into the cockpit with Lance Roark, and it'll be as if you're there in the cockpit with Lance.